Hello, everybody, and welcome to Murder Mondays. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? All right, so we're going to start this one off with a little personal story about milk. All right, no, seriously. I am starting at 9 Eastern Standard Time, Nico. That is right now. Yeah, did you catch that? Yeah, you did catch that, Johnny. Hey, Priscilla, thank you for stopping in. I appreciate it. April, thanks for coming. Crow, what's up, man? Four Warnings, Boogeyman, Johnny, Rainer's here. And I'd like to thank everybody for stopping in. Tanner, thanks for coming. So, should we start this one out with, do you want me to get into reading a story, or do you want me to say a personal story? How do you guys want to start this one? And my chat just disappeared on me. Man, I love it when it does that. You want to hear about the milk? Well, one time, many moons ago, I opened my refrigerator. There was a gallon of milk in there, and there wasn't much left inside. I was very thirsty from smoking many blunts that day. That was a long time ago. I don't smoke blunts anymore. But I grabbed the milk, I opened it, and I went to take a drink. And what was inside of that milk jug was no longer milk. It was more of a yogurt texture, but tasted like rancid malted milk balls without the chocolate. It traumatized me, and I immediately threw up. Now, I can't even look at milk that's like within 3 days of its expiration date without wanting to throw up. Yes, please smash that like button and sub me if you're not subbed. And I'd like to thank everyone for coming in and hanging out with me. So I will tell a real personal story. Actually, sadly, that was a real personal story. But I will tell, yes, murder that like button. Well, if you murder it, that means nobody else can do it, though. You know what I mean? It's like that's like a one-time deal. Maybe if you all just work together to murder it at once. I am good. Thank you for asking. I am doing great. I was having an awesome conversation with people in Discord right before this started. So I am going to tell a story about a ritual I did. Those of you that were with me last week, you know that I used to be pretty heavily into witchcraft and whatnot. So in this book here, this is my old book of shadows. I had a friend who wanted to do witchcraft with me. I gave him warnings. I told him this is some serious stuff. This can be dangerous. Don't mess around. This isn't a game. Are you sure you're ready for this? That sort of deal. He swore up and down, I am ready for this. I can handle this. Don't worry about me. So back in the woods, I had already had a spot that I did rituals and whatnot. And I took him back to my circle, and I had it all set up. And there was a point in the ritual where I had to take my dagger and stab it into the ground. Well, the moment that the dagger went into the ground, this eerie music started playing and like just emanated from everywhere all around us. And he starts freaking out. And when you're doing a ritual and stuff, you just kind of, you never know what to expect. So whatever happens can be odd. Like sometimes one thing can happen, sometimes something else can happen with the same ritual. So he's freaking out because of the music, and that's all it was. It was just some music, some little ambient sort of music going on. And so I'm continuing on with the ritual. And there was a quiet time in the ritual where you just kind of sit there quietly in meditation. And he's freaking out because all around the circle, right out of the candlelight, I had two candles, right out of the candlelight, you could see all these shadows running around in the woods right outside of the circle. And they were all over the place. There was a lot of them. And so he's freaking out the whole time. I'm finishing the ritual because I'm not going to interrupt the ritual. So I take the dagger out of the ground. The moment I took the dagger out of the ground, the music stopped. So he starts freaking out even more because he's like, the music stopped. What the heck? Because I think he was trying to rationalize in his own head that the music was from something else completely. But all these shadows and everything are still going all over the place around us. So I told him, you just stay in this circle. You're safe here. Nothing's going to come inside of here and hurt you. You don't have to worry about that. And I step out of the circle to a smaller circle that I had, and I open my book once again where I have an exorcism spell. I do the exorcism spell, everything recedes, all of the dark shadows recede, and everything else. And I'm like, all right, dude, we got to go right now because right now it's safe. We got to go. Don't mess around. Let's just go. So grab my candles and we go. And we could hear stuff following us all the way back through the trail and everything else. I actually practice something called necromancy. So, so the shadow things were following us all the way back, and we got back into the trailer park that I live in and stuff like that. And he goes home. Well, the next day he ended up losing his shit, and he literally got committed into a mental hospital after this because his mind was not ready for what was happening. And he was in a mental hospital for like 3 months after that. And like I warned him, like I said, I don't think you're ready for this, dude. But he thought he was, and he wasn't. And so if you're thinking about getting into stuff like that, I don't suggest you do it because it is some pretty serious business. And if you're not careful, it can really mess with your psyche, and you might not be able to handle it. Hello, Haley. Thank you for coming, Haley. So yeah, there's that personal story. My buddy ended up in a mental hospital because he couldn't handle what was going on. All right, so now I will get into the first story. I can't remember who all gave me all the stories, so I'm not sure if the people are here that are doing it and all this stuff. Is Penny Tails up here? Penny, are you even here? If not, I'll wait a little bit to do your story. I'm not seeing her, so I'll wait. Yeah, I don't think she is either, Nico. Hillbilly's here, though, correct? And my chat's gone. Why does my chat keep disappearing like that? What is up with that? I don't understand that. Hillbilly Creeper, you are here, correct? I thought I seen him. Yeah, there he is right there. All right, so I'm going to read one of his stories. He wrote this. He gave me two of them I can read, so I can read them at separate times. This one is called The Faceless Lolly, the edited version. There is a curse that plagues this town, like an epidemic that holds no cure. This curse comes in the form of a little girl. No one knows where this little girl came from, and whoever sees her will either die or disappear without a trace. However, those who are lucky enough, those who have seen this curse, have only seen the mask that it wears, but never its true face. That's probably why people wind up dead or disappear off the face of the earth. They saw what she looks like. Some people have said that she wore a white dress stained with blood and had black dress shoes on. Others say her dress was pink and she carried a stuffed toy which was covered in human flesh and marble painted with blood of her victims. Me, well, I have seen her up close and personal. Why I'm still alive is yet to be determined, but I know why people have never seen her face. It's because when confronted with this curse, it appears that she doesn't have a face, or so it seems. Here's what happened a few years ago. I was babysitting for a friend, watching her children because she had a date and she couldn't find a babysitter at the last moment, and since I lived just next door, I was the closest thing she could find. While she was out, I fed her children and got them off to bed. When they were upstairs asleep, calmly and safely, I figured I would sit down on the couch and watch a little television until my friend got back. When I was in the middle of watching my program, I nodded off to sleep until I was startled out of my sleep by a loud thumping sound coming from upstairs. Hearing this made my very Hearing this made me very alert and afraid. When I finally realized that it was coming from upstairs, I assumed that it must have been one of her children getting up to go to the bathroom. I thought nothing of it and went back to watching my program until I heard the thump again. Concerned and curious, I went upstairs to go check on the children, but I made my way up the stairs. I saw a shadow as I headed up the stairs. At first, I thought it was one of the children, but the shadow appeared to be too small to be one of my friend's children. I called out to the little shadow and asked, "Hello, is anyone there?" All I received in return was a girlish giggle. It was eerie and sounded like it came from a very young child. It was playful and mysterious, but also seemed somewhat forced. It's hard to explain, but if I were to use one way to describe the giggles, it was as if it held no emotion. It was cold. Have you ever heard a child laugh so maniacally? Wait, sorry. Have you ever heard a child laugh so maniacally? I hadn't until that moment. I continued cautiously up the stairs. The shadow was gone, and all that remained was pitch black darkness. I reached for the light in the hall and headed towards the children's bedroom. I went to the oldest child to check on him and see if everything was all right. And as I walked into the room where he was sound asleep in his and as I walked into the room, he was sound asleep in his bed. I was concerned because I didn't hear any breathing or snoring or any sort of sleeping noises at all for that matter. I found this kind of odd. Even the quietest of sleepers at least made some type of sound. Thinking this, I went closer to the bed and began to lightly shake him while I asked if he was okay. Still no movement. I pulled back the covers, and to my horror, I discovered that the poor child was brutally gutted like a pig, with his intestines and organs strewn out over him. The only thing that was apparent to me at the time was the look of sheer terror on his face before he died. The expression he took to his death, it was such a mangled, deformed look which was staring back at me, cold and agonizing. At this point, I didn't know whether to scream or puke. I tried desperately to choke back a scream. That's when I realized that I needed to check on the youngest brother. So without a second thought, I ran to the young boy's room to check on him. I silently prayed that he was still alive, but to my surprise, he was gone. I called out his name, but there was no response. As I ran downstairs and continued to yell for him, I heard his voice laughing along with the little girl giggle behind it. And I heard him talking to someone. He said, "Are you sure this will be a fun game to play? I don't know. My mommy told me never to go off with strange people." That's when I heard the giggle again, followed by the little girl's voice that was so soft it was almost a whisper. She responded, "It's okay. It will be a fun game, I promise. We will have lots of fun together. Just like I had fun playing with your older brother, but
He didn't want to play as much, but that's all right. I took care of him, and as long as you play with me, I won't have to do away with you like I did your brother.
I ran to where the voices were coming from, and that's when I saw her. She was wearing a white dress, covered in blood, and holding a stuffed animal that looked oddly like a giraffe, which was covered in blood. I yelled out to them to stop where they were. The little girl turned around to face me. I was shocked to realize she didn't have a face. She had all the features of a little girl, but no fucking face. I began to charge towards her, trying to grab my friend's son, but to no avail. The little girl stopped me. I don't know how she did it, but once I got close to her, I felt like I hit an invisible wall. On impact, I was launched backwards, thrown against a wall as I laid there. It seemed as if minutes had passed before I began to gain consciousness. Defeated, I watched on as they headed out the door holding hands together. They were laughing and giggling. I tried to stop them again, but she was just too strong for me to handle. How could a little girl be this damn strong? Each and every time I tried to pull him away from her, even though she had managed to stop me each and every time, I still tried one last time. This was when she turned around again and started to giggle once more. To my annoyance, she said,
Don't try to stop me, or you will wind up like everyone else that I play with. Just another body in the morgue. So if you know what's good for you, you leave me alone and let me have my fun.
I yelled out, "Why the fuck are you doing this? Why?" She replied to my question,
Because it's fun, silly. Killing people
"Is so fun."
it gives me a pleasure, and nothing can compare to it. Just the feeling of blood splash all over my face and the warm, slimy feel of intestines and organs jiggling in my hands. Just like how I imagine Christmas is.
So back off.
The only reason I'm sparing you is that my new friend asked me to. So if you know what's good for you, you don't stop me.
Ever. She then released a giggle, like a laugh, then turned around and grabbed a hold of my friend's son by his hand and began to walk away into the darkness. I watched on helpless, and an overwhelming feeling of dread and worry flooded me, but more so fear. My gut turned as their silhouettes became one with the darkness of the chill evening night. No, not knowing what else to do, I ran back into the house and immediately called the police. Then I called my friend and told her the whole story of what happened. The police came, they questioned me, and though I pleaded and begged them to look for this little girl, I became a suspect for a while as I continued to tell them all that I knew and tried to tell them everything that had happened. But they didn't believe me. They just chopped it they just chopped it off as a robbery gone wrong and a kidnapping. When my friend got back home, she blamed me for this as she cried. She watched her oldest son be carried off in a body bag. I can only imagine what she's going through right now, especially if I had children and that happened to me. I'd be completely upset and pissed off beyond belief. But her sadness didn't last long. I'm afraid a month or two after her son's funeral and after she stopped looking for her youngest, she went into deep depression. She went into a deep, deep depression. It was so deep, there was no return. She even stopped talking to me until one day, the delivery man started to smell something coming from her house. He explained it as the smell of death. When the cops came to bust the door down, they found her laying there dead in the living room with her wrists sliced open and pills scattered all over the floor. She had committed suicide. I guess the thought of losing her children was too much for her. She couldn't take it anymore. As for me, I dedicated my life to hunt down this demon-like child traveled to traveled to town after town for each clue that is left, especially when a child goes missing, is found dead, or someone else like a parent is dead. Just knowing that it's her claiming another victim. Every once in a while, I get closer to finding her. How is that, you may ask? Well, it's simple. I always follow the giggling, and that always gets me closer to finding the creature I have now called the Faceless Lowly. So, what y'all think about that one? It's a pretty cool story. This sounds like every naughty child I know. Oh, yeah, see, Hillbilly Creeper is here. All right. So, if you haven't yet, murder that like button. Subscribe to me if you're not. That'd be awesome. I'd appreciate that. And so, should I go into another personal story? I do have a Patreon. That is true. At the bottom of the description should be the links to any and all things that, if you felt like supporting my channel, then I have a Patreon and a PayPal and a merch store. So if you guys want to, you can go ahead and check that out. You don't have to, though. All right, so this next story. This is really three stories that I'll put into one. So the first time this happened in the forest, I had just gotten done doing a ritual. I had just gotten done doing a ritual. It was a simple ritual, nothing bad, and not summoning any demons or anything, anything like that. Um, I was sitting there, I was meditating afterwards, and all of a sudden I hear something barreling through the woods, like full speed, barreling through the woods, like as fast as they could go. And so I jump up and I'm like, what the fuck? Because it's dark out. And I thought maybe it was a person coming through the woods because that's what it sounded like. So my eyes are peeled towards where the sound is coming from. And in the distance, I can see branches moving, the underbrush moving, things like that, like something is just trucking through the woods. So I'm watching, and it's getting closer and closer to me. And all of a sudden it gets to the point where I am, and I see it right in front of me. I see everything move in front of me and everything else, but there was nothing there. Nothing. Nothing there at all. So I had no idea what it was. No clue, because I couldn't see anything. So after that, a while later, me and a whole group of friends, I think there was probably about seven of us all together, maybe even eight, I don't know, but there was a bunch of us. We are in the woods and we are smoking some of the devil's cabbage, the jazz cabbage, the devil's lettuce, the wacky tobacco. And all of a sudden, the same thing starts happening with everybody there. This thing starts barreling through the woods. And at this point, it wasn't like real dark out. At this time, it was kind of like the twilights where you could still almost see a little bit, but it's still dark, but you can still see. And we see everything going. We're hearing branches breaking on the ground, like something's stomping on it. Something's just barreling right through the woods. Well, for some reason, everyone decides they want to jump right behind me. And my one buddy, Josh, he's like, you know about this stuff? And he gets behind me and kind of nudges me forward. And so I'm just standing there like, okay. And it's coming at me. I can see something barreling through the woods. The branches right in front of me are bended and everything else. But then it gets to me, and it is just a warm breeze that goes right through me. And again, there was nothing there, and everybody's freaking out. The whole group of people is just freaking right out because they all knew something was coming. You could hear it, you could see everything coming towards you. But once it got there, there was nothing. So we leave the woods at that point. We were just like, we're done, fuck this. And we left. And then at another time, I was up on the ridge. It was a gravel pit behind where we live. And there used to be a big old ridge up there that went down into a pit. Now they all flattened it out and stuff. It doesn't look like that anymore. But we were sitting up there and we're drinking like a case of beer, like a 15 pack of like Bud Light or something like that. And we're just hanging out on top of the hill, just drinking. And all of a sudden, we were facing the gravel pit away from all the houses and everything else from where we were. And we're just sitting there drinking, just hanging out, talking, and everything else. Middle of the night, I don't even know what time it was, but it was dark out. And all of a sudden, we hear something barreling up the hill behind us. And our first thought was, oh, because we were minors, we shouldn't have been drinking, for one. And our first thought was, oh shit, we're busted. We thought, especially since it was coming up from behind us from where all the houses and everything were, we thought we were busted. And somehow somebody managed to see us up on this ledge drinking this freaking case of beer or something. We were like freaking 15, 16 years old or some shit. And so we hear it barreling up behind us. And then we see the weeds on the edge of the trail that went around the top bend down. And then we even seen the rocks move and fall down the side of the hill where it went down into the gravel pit. We seen the rocks move and everything. And there was nothing there. Nothing at all. And so he was like, dude, we got to go. What the hell? So we grabbed a case of beer and we went over to our friend's house to finish drinking it. But again, I think this ties in because last week, I think I mentioned it last week, that the place was actually partially built on an Indian burial ground and on Native American land. And so I think that ties into that. I think it's some sort of territorial Native American spirit back there or something like that. Hey, what's up? PSPR Paranormal Pursuit. Thanks for stopping by. And so I'm pretty sure it has something to do with the Native American land, that why these things were in the woods. Now, the woods are still there. There has been a bunch of houses built on there now at this point. So it's not as accessible as it used to be, but some of the woods are still there. The gravel pit's still there, even though it's not a pit anymore. And I still go mushroom hunting and stuff back there in those woods, but I haven't been back there so much at night. I need to go back there. All right. So that was it. 3 stories in one with some invisible force just barreling through the freaking woods at us. And I will get to the next story. Who's all here? Roll call. It says I got 10 people here. Penny's not here though, is she? All right, I'll just get on to another story here. And again, I apologize that I don't remember who sent me what this time because I pulled them all up. And thank you everybody for sticking around. So this story is called I Am Not My Sister's Keeper. It was written by Black Friday Switch 13. Camille was always the pretty one, even though we were identical twins. Camille had naturally long golden hair, and her eyes were blue too. They had a light in them that my own didn't seem to have, and my hair was darker in color. I wasn't jealous of her, though, because she was my sister and I loved her in those days. We had both always possessed a certain competitive spirit, and while I was the brainiac, Camille was beautiful. I was shy and reserved, often keeping to myself, while she was loud and full of laughter and had many friends. I would watch her, wishing I could be more like her as she could take control of a room and charm anyone she met. I recall growing up, my mom said I almost died in childbirth. My heartbeat had dropped and the doctor ordered a cesarean section. As I lie on the table, clinging for dear life, my mother said it was as though I was between 2 worlds, this one and the nether. Things changed between us permanently one tragically beautiful summer evening. We had turned 15 that day, and so a bonfire was held for us by our mutual friends. Donnie, Amy, Brian, and Jake were there with us like they always were. It was our little group of friends, and we were a bit of a clique even at school. We were the popular ones. We rarely did things without the others in our group because it was like our secret club. The fire was high, and Jake, the one I denied I had a crush on, kept kicking the edge of the logs into the heat, causing it to rise and fall with the fury of yellow and orange, and were laughing, listening to music, and roasting marshmallows. I watched him out of the corner of my eye, sneaking a beer out of his book bag and then handing it to Donnie. Together they laughed and talked, and I watched them as I stared at the fire. Just then I saw Amy sit down next to her boyfriend, Brian, and the two young lovers snuck away to find an area to be more private so they could kiss. Camille came over and then sat next to me, ignoring me entirely and striking up a conversation with Jake. She always did that to me. She still had to be the center of attention. Sometimes I honestly hated her for it. I watched her laugh and smile, touching Jake's arm. I watched Jake then smile and blush at her, and then he offered up some of his beer to Camille. I watched her roll her eyes and toss her hair over her shoulder, but even though she played as though she was reluctant to take a sip, she proceeded anyhow. I had enough and stood up to take a walk when it happened. Camille was handing a large bottle to Jake when it slipped from her hand and fell into the log that fell in front of me. I tripped and fell directly into the fire. Everyone ran to my aid as they tried to put out the fire that was now engulfing half of my body and the left side of my face. Luckily, they helped me away quickly enough that the damage wasn't as severe as it could have been. My face, however, was forever scarred on one side. Doctors helped with surgery over the years, and even though I'm now nearly 40, the pain of seeing my sister's life get even better without her twin to threaten her had caused me a lot of sorrow. Without my face being precisely like hers, there was room for her to blossom because we were no longer twins. I became a freak, and she became a debundant, a debut, what the, a debutante? I don't know what that is. She never let me forget it either. She always took pleasure out of succeeding in the limelight while I failed in the shadows. I'd always liked Jake. We were good friends, and I could always confide in him, but after that day, he stopped looking at me the way he once did, and it changed everything. He and Camille struck up a romantic relationship and married right out of high school. Their wedding was small but beautiful. I was not in the wedding because, according to Camille, it would mean people would be staring at me. I would have gladly been her matron of honor if she would have wanted me to. I watched while Camille went off to college and became a marketing director for a small corporation just outside of Cincinnati. I, on the other hand, became a librarian and hid in the halls and shadows of bookshelves. It was in one of those long halls of books that I saw Jake one afternoon. I couldn't help smiling when I saw him his I couldn't help smiling when I saw him as his big blue eyes brightened at the sight of me. I played it off, but even though he had married Camille, I still rather liked him. It was hard not to. He came over to me and smiled up at me. Hey, you. I was wondering if you could help me with finding an older book I was looking for. No problem. What is it? I can't recall the name of the author, but it's about a man who was in a war and wrote letters to his wife. I had him come back with me to where my computer was, and I began to type in titles and authors that it could be. I noticed he was looking up at me and staring at me intently. I covered my face a bit with my hair, not even realizing what I was doing. I can barely see the scars anymore. What's it been, 25 years or so? Jake asked me. Oh, 27 years. Some things you never forget, I said, looking at him but hiding under my dark blonde hair. You're still pretty, you know. I don't know why you hide your face. He held up his hand and caressed my cheek. The captain and the nurse, I said, ignoring him, pulling away. The what? He looked at me puzzled. I smiled demurely at him. The book you were looking for is in the romance and literature section, M, row 11. You should find the author there is under Vion Blair. Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. I'll see you later at the house for dinner, he said, and walked off to find the book he desired. I had forgotten that we had dinner planned with our parents. Camille would be there, of course. I tried not to think about what Jake had said to me. I decided not to let my feelings get the better of me. I couldn't help it, however. Ever since that day, he became Camille's world. I was just I was just the one living in the shadows, watching as she lived the life I should have. How dare she? I slammed a heavy book down at my work desk and grabbed my coat, having finished for the day. As I walked home from work, I thought about Camille and Jake more. Something seemed to possess me for the first time in my life. I became furious at her and even more so at myself. Why had it why had I let it go on for so long? Why had I never told my sister how I felt? I had become distant and cold over the years since the fire, and I knew she noticed. At least I hoped she did. Somehow I didn't believe she cared. When I got to my home, I was shocked to find my sister there. I looked at her across the room, and I looked at her across the room, looking at me just standing there in her pretty pink sweater. Her manicured nails and perfect long hair hung over her shoulder as she stood with that typical know it all look upon her face. She grinned at me and sat as I sat my purse down. What do I owe this pleasure, sis? I thought maybe we could go to dinner together, she said, looking at me with her sly grin. I became overly annoyed suddenly. I'm sick of you always getting what you want. If that fire had not scarred me for life, everything would have been so different. What are you talking about? She asked, looking genuinely confused. You stole him from me. You knew I cared for Jake, and you made every effort to destroy those chances. I have no idea what you're talking about. She looked back at me, almost imitating the expressions upon my face. I only became more enraged and picked up the fireplace poker. I hit Camille over the head with it. She fell on the floor, looking back at me. I stood over her, still angry, but satisfied with my decision to make my final blow. I raised my hands up to hit her, memories flashing into my mind of how she had betrayed me, stolen everything from me. She was prettier than me, she was wealthy, had the life and the job I wanted, and most of all, she had Jake. I watched as the blood seeped from her nose and mouth as her distorted face crumpled up, blah, looking up at me, frozen forever in place as the life in her eyes left her. The door opened and it was Jake. I looked at him, terrified now, at what I knew he would now catch me in the act. I just stood I just stood there looking at him, my face white as snow. Camilla, are you ready yet? What? I just looked at him and then started to sob. Jake came over to me and put his arms around me. What is it? He looked down at the floor and then up at me. I didn't mean to, I sobbed, dropping the poker to the floor. But, Camille. I looked at him, hiding my gaze away from Camille. I didn't want to see what I had done. He looked at me, his face growing worried. We've been over this before. You are Camille. You fell into fire, and it caused a great deal of trauma back then. But you don't have a sister. She died in childbirth. Do you recall now? He held me in his arms, looking into my eyes intently. No, I killed her, I screamed at him. I know I had hit her. He made me feel possessed. He looked at me strangely, and then he looked at the ground as a soft expression came over his face. No, my sweet, you didn't. I'll call Dr. Brannigan tomorrow, and we'll go see him. He bent down and picked up a broken piece of glass. It's only a mirror. We can get a new one. I looked up at him, stunned, looking at the ground, and all around me on the floor were broken pieces of thick glass. And the larger pieces, I could still see Camille's eyes staring back at me. Interesting twist. Hello, Lex. Mr. Reality. Black Friday's Witch 13. Thank you all for stopping by. Hey, I'm doing good. How are you doing? I'm doing great, Mr. Reality. Thanks for asking. Johnny, are you offering me milk again? Oh, wait a minute, Johnny. I gotta get that one. And my computer's acting up now. Am I still on? I can't even see the screen, so I hope I'm still on. My computer's acting up now. I guess it says that my webcam's still on. So, as I wait for my computer to stop acting up, I guess I can get into another personal story. This time, I'll talk about how my grandmother tried to poison me. Not just me, my whole family. So, when I was about 15, pretty sure I was 15. I guess I don't know for certain. It was 14 or 15. There we go. 14 or 15. Not 100% sure. But my grandmother always cooked dinner, like Christmas dinner. And it was always on Christmas Eve. So, hold on. Sorry. So Christmas Eve comes around. We're supposed to go over there for dinner, just like we were every single year. And we're over there, and she serves up dinner, and I eat, and my father eats, and everybody eats. And later on that day, I started feeling very, 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 very ill. Like my stomach hurt so bad. And I'm at my buddy's house, and we're talking about Christmas and stuff like that. And all of a sudden, the pressure in my stomach. Hey, Bones Yard, it's all right, man. I'm glad you like my content, though. I know that some of them do get, long, but my dog still loves me. Some of them do get long, though. I do like to put some longer ones, but then I also like to do some shorter ones and stuff like that because I know a lot of people don't have a lot of time. So I do try to do a little mix and stuff like that of stuff. So I ate the dinner at my grandma's for Christmas, and my stomach starts hurting really bad talking to my buddy, and all of a sudden the pressure in my stomach gets to the point where it literally felt like my stomach like exploded, and I felt something like seeping out of the side of my stomach, and I'm like, and I'm like, I gotta go home. So I go home, and as soon as I walk in the door, my mom's like, do you need to go to the hospital? And I'm like, no, I'm just gonna go to bed. So the next day, my mom tells me that the food was rancid. She let me eat it. My mom still let me eat the fucking food. But the food was rancid, and my grandma had left it out for like a week. Come to find out, she had cooked everything like a week early, left it all sitting out for like a whole week to go bad, to try to give us all food poisoning really bad, so that we wouldn't go to her house for Christmas dinner anymore. Like it was all because she didn't want to cook Christmas dinner anymore. So instead of being a normal person and being like, hey, you guys, I'm getting too old to do this. I don't really want to do this anymore. Instead, she thought it would be a better idea and a more logical idea to just give us all severe cases of food poisoning so that she would no longer have to cook and we wouldn't want to go over there for Christmas dinner anymore. So yeah, I actually am still affected by that to this day. I still have problems with my stomach because Wilma, bless her soul, tried to poison us. Well, did poison us all. Hey, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm glad you like my narrator voice. I appreciate that. So yeah, yeah, right, Johnny. That's some real nice family love. It really, really is. I just oh, and I also want to say other narrators, everybody on here has some channel and stuff like that. Check each other's channels out, support each other and stuff like that during this. It is all good, and I think we all try to, we all should try to stick together. You know what I mean? So let's give each other some support, sub each other if you're not already sub to each other, and check out each other's channel because every little bit helps. Might be something you like. So now I will get into reading another story. And this one's for you, Johnny. Hey, it's okay, Aries. Thanks for coming by, though. I appreciate you coming in. Johnny, this story is called White Milk, and it was written by Easy Misery. I was born and raised in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. Unless you live nearby, you've probably never heard of it. Even people in large Wisconsin cities, Madison, Milwaukee, don't know we exist. Wisconsin in general is known for our cheese, our cows, and our love of beer, and of course for our excess of mental institution and serial killers. Ed Gein and Jeffrey Dahmer hail from my home state. In case you've been living under a rock, they are two of the most infamous serial killers in America. I don't know if it's the cold climate or what, but we seem to breed quite a bit of crazy up here. Sheboygan is not immune from the crazy. We have this old abandoned asylum by the highway. It used to house the criminally insane, at least according to local folklore. This is where the Milk White legend came from. Milk White was supposedly a patient at the asylum. He was born there, his mother being one of the inmates. No one knew what to do with him, so he crawled around the asylum eating scraps. He had no other kids to play with. He was an albino, and any form of light would horribly burn his skin, so he was never awake when there was daylight. Milk White grew up learning madness from the other inmates, desperate for human companionship. Something about that madness turned him from a human into a demon. The story is that one day he found a way to get in and out of the asylum. He got it into his head that he could go find friends from the city. He peered into the windows of every house to see if anyone was awake. If he found a child awake, he would steal them away. Of course, children are loud, so instead of taking them alive, he would use his huge teeth to crush their necks. He would prop up the corpses of the children in the asylum basement, pretending to have an entire room of friends. He would sing them nursery rhymes in the dead of night. The asylum was shut down a long time ago. Milk White had nowhere to go. So they say he still lives in the abandoned building, going out at night and bringing back the bodies of any kids still awake after dark. This was all regarded as an urban legend, but I remember that story back from when I was a kid. There was an odd little rhyme that we used to sing on the playground. It went, hush now, sleep tight, or else beware of Milk White. He doesn't fuss, he doesn't fight, he'll kill you dead in just one bite. Parents would use this tale to scare their children into going to sleep. It worked well, or at least it did for me. I fully believed the myth up until middle school. I remember that's when a new kid moved to town. He was from New York City, so we all thought he had to be way cooler than any of us. His name was Jimmy. He had a New York accent and everything. He wore chucks and had a leather jacket. He wore it all year round, even in the middle of winter. He was never quiet about how much he hated it in Sheboygan. My friend Hans and I made an uneasy friendship with him. Hans was 17, but dumb enough to be held back to middle school. He was huge compared to us. We had been friends for a while. I actually grew up with his brother Peter. Peter disappeared on a camping trip when we were 7. After that, I started becoming closer with Hans. We'd hang out, play video games, and just do nothing. He wasn't very smart, hence being held back for so long, but he was a good guy. I liked being his friend. I was a pretty typical 12-year-old, scrawny and trying to appear cooler than I was. I wasn't particularly special, but I guess I was a good kid. Jimmy was the one with all the confidence. He could talk to girls and get himself out of trouble easily. He also thought he knew everything. It was Jimmy's idea to scope out the asylum. I think he was bored of the snow and wanted to do something exciting. That's when I told him about Milk White. What a crock of shit, he responded. That's a fucking baby story. You don't really believe that. I looked at Han, who shook his head stupidly. Han was pretty happy to have friends, so he would have done anything for Jimmy or me. I was scared, but I shook my head too. Jimmy decided we would go to the asylum that night. He joked about Milk White, calling him a pathetic excuse for a ghost story. Han and I were horrified that he would mock the creature that haunted our childhoods, but we tried to act calm about it. We snuck out around midnight and met up over the pass. I was bundled in about 7 layers of wool. Jimmy, like always, wore his leather jacket. He led the way as we trudged through the snow towards the abandoned building. Excuse me. It must have it must have been impressive once, but now it just looked decayed. While we were walking, Hans grabbed my arm and pointed to the ground. A set of footprints were in the snow. The prints were large, like that of a grown man, but there were toe marks as if the person was barefoot. I debated showing them to Jimmy, but I knew he would just laugh at me, and I shrugged at Hans and said, "Come on." We got to the main entrance of the asylum just as a fresh falling of snow began to accumulate. Jimmy tried to open the door, but it was shut firmly. He kicked at it, but no use. Hans was shivering. "Looks like we can't get in." Jimmy laughed at him. "You fucking pussy. We haven't even tried yet." Jimmy has a terrible mouth on him. Hans and I were good Midwestern Hans and I were good Midwestern boys. We never swore, but Jimmy was very different than us. He moved around to a boarded up window. It was low enough so that he could use his hands to pry under the boards. With a violent jerk, he pulled the plank away. We could see that there was no glass inside. Jimmy made a loud "aha" sound and fought the other board loose. "You coming, pansies?" He pulled himself up to the window and slipped inside. Hans and I looked at each other nervously. If we went in, we'd be confronting the very thing we had feared since kindergarten. If we didn't, we'd lose our friendship with Jimmy and probably any shred of reputation. I took a deep breath of cold air and hoisted myself through the window. I landed on a pile of broken boards. Apparently, other people had tried to get in as well, because there were planks everywhere. Jimmy was rubbing his leg. "I think I fucking cut myself." His jeans had a long gash in them. I stood up and dusted myself off. Hans Hans flew through the window with a heavy thump. He shrieked and held up his hand. A nail was embedded into his palm. Jimmy went over to him and yanked the thing out. Tears poured down Hans' cheeks. Jimmy rolled his eyes. "You're a big fucking baby, aren't you? Scared of a ghost and a little blood." He turned his back on us and started walking towards the hall. We all had thought we all had thought ahead to bring flashlights, but they weren't much help. The halls were pitch black. We walked along the wall, keeping our hands steady for balance. We heard a squeak from behind us, and I almost jumped out of my skin. Jimmy just laughed. "Scared of mice now too, Queer?" The entire time we explored the asylum, I barely breathed. It wasn't just the darkness, it was the unknown. We found empty wheelchairs and creepy looking metal cots. Our flashlights scanned the blackness, but nothing moved. Once we had once Once we had been exploring for an hour or so, I felt my heartbeat slow. Jimmy was obviously right. Milk White was just a baby story to scare kids. It was Hans who found the door to the basement. He pointed at it with his flashlight. Jimmy tried to handle, but it was stuck. He tried kicking it down. He tried kicking down the door, but he just hurt his ankle. I stood silently. Jimmy shone his light in Hans' face. You, big guy, kick the door. I want to see what's down there. Hans started trembling and shook his head no. Jimmy pushed him. Come on, you big idiot. Do something useful for fuck's sake. Hans looked down, embarrassed. I stepped towards them. Maybe we should go. Jimmy sneered. Or maybe you should. We all stopped because of what we heard. It was footsteps. It sounded like they were coming up from the stairs from the basement. I stared open mouthed at Jimmy, who was frozen in place. The footsteps were loud. They sounded like skin slapping on metal. Turn off your lights, now! Jimmy hissed. We all shut our flashlights off and huddled against the wall. Hans was shaking really bad, and I could smell that he had peed himself. Jimmy was swearing under his breath. The footsteps kept going until they were almost right next to us. And then there was the sound of a doorknob creaking. It was completely dark, so we couldn't see a thing. All we could do was listen as the door slid open. That's when we heard the voice. It was a deep voice of a man, but sung unreasonably high. It sang slash whispered, Hush now, sleep tight. Jimmy was rocking back and forth. I could feel the fear emanating from him. He had his jaw clenched and his teeth made a horrible crunch. The voice just kept singing, Beware, beware of Milk White. I must have trembled because my thumb knocked on the button of my flashlight. In a single second, it illuminated the hallway and we could see the source of the voice. All of us gasped at once. It stood barely 2 feet away. It might have been a man once, but now it had the posture of a scorpion. It was naked, standing with its feet spread apart like an insect, its head reared back like it would spit venom. The nails on its feet and hands were so overgrown that they curled back into its skin, and the teeth jutted from its mouth. They hung down as if they hung down as if it were too heavy for it to lift its head properly. Its skin, it wasn't white, not like the rhyme said. It was stained red. It took a step towards us and whispered, Kill you dead with just one bite. And that's when Hans bashed my head with his flashlight. I woke up on the floor of the asylum. Daylight had only just creeped into the sky. My head was pounding. I struggled to stand, but I must have gotten frostbite in the night. My fingers and toes were completely numb. I looked around and saw Jimmy passed out near me. He had a giant bruise on his temple. I tried to wake him, but he wouldn't stir. I don't know how I did it, but I managed to stand up and drag Jimmy out of the window. I wasn't strong enough to sling him over my shoulder, so I just had to drag him through the snow. He made soft pain sounds, but didn't wake up. I made it to the tavern by the highway. They weren't open, but I pounded on the door until my knuckles bled, screaming for help. The owner finally came to see what all the noise was and let us in. He was visibly shaken by our appearance. He called the police and our parents, and soon I was wrapped in blankets and slowly beginning to feel warm again. Jimmy eventually woke up in the hospital with minor memory loss. I told the police my story and they searched the entire asylum. They didn't find anything. No evidence of any foul play except the blood Jimmy had lost. No one knew where Hans was. His parents were devastated. Now they had lost 2 sons. Jimmy had no memory of the night's events, at least that's what he said. My parents made me see a psychologist who told me I created the whole thing in my mind. She said Hans must have done something terrible to Jimmy and I just blocked it out. After all, Hans was much older and bigger than us, and then he left town so suddenly. The psych implied that it was sexual abuse. She said I made up the image of Milk White because I knew that from my childhood. It was easier than facing the truth. I went to bed before dark every night until I went away for college. I never went back to Sheboygan. My parents hound me to visit, but I refuse to return. They think it's because of what Hans did to me. But I know what I saw. And I know that Hans only hurt me to knock me out. He knew that Milk White can't get you if you're asleep. Hans is out with Gretel, right? All right, there's that story. That was a cool story. All right. This story was given to me by Mr. Reality. I think he was the one that gave me this one. It was written by Carl Bonner. That's the one that you sent me, right, Mr. Reality? Mr. Reality just hit 500? Congrats, man. Well done. Awesome, dude. That's awesome. I'm on my way. Actually, I've been kind of stuck around 350 for a little bit. I keep like losing some and gaining some and stuff like that, but it's all good. I'll get there. All right. This one is called We Get Worse Things Than Snakes Out Here in Australia. Will I wear a flannel red shirt? I don't have one. I don't own a flannel shirt. Like all my shirts are literally gray, black, or I got like an OD green shirt. I'm like, that's it. That's all I wear. All right. Living in Australia as a kid is strange. You get all the American and British media, television, and books. We watch the same shows and, in a lot of ways, share the same culture. But none of that belongs here in Australia. It all feels out of place. Christmas specials always remind me. Oh, wait. Christmas specials always remind me of that. It's always snowing on television at Christmas time, and I'm watching kids build snowmen and families wear those tacky patterned jumpers while I'm melting in the middle of a blistering Australian summer just trying to stay conscious in the heat. I guess we have a lot of the same urban legends, too, the same scary stories and monsters. They travel here one way or another serial killer hitchhikers, werewolves, vampires, all that. But they don't really belong in Australia. I don't know if you've ever seen the Australian landscape, but it's nothing like the forest or plains you get in Europe or in the States. For start, we call the forested parts here the bush. The name is the name is bloody appropriate too. A eucalyptus forest is hard going for hikers. The undergrowth is so thick and scraggly everywhere other than the paths that have been worn by the bushwalkers or animals. If you want to go off the path, well, imagine walking through a hedge filled with thorns and barbs. Now, add the very likelihood of spiders, which aren't like those little pussy ones you guys get, big fat spiders with thick ropey webs that tangle around your face and neck if you aren't watching. Then there's the risk of snakes, or more dangerous, unseen ledges or cliffs. The whole thing is a huge pain in the arse. Your monsters, they wouldn't fit in here. It's hard to imagine being chased through the woods by a werewolf, and when anything bigger than a rabbit has to keep to the paths or find itself tangled up into lantana. But most white kids don't actually learn much about the old Aboriginal stories. The things which live out in the bush, or those big red deserts. I think about that a lot now. particularly after living alone in a place called Black Heath in the Blue Mountains. It's not far from Sydney, the city with the big pretty bridge. My curiosity was nothing more until recently. Recently, things got pretty rough out there on my own. Living alone can really screw with your head. Most nights I sit out on my deck till late, reading and writing while I have a smoke. I have a floodlight out there, but it draws in too many bugs, especially in the summer. We get these things called Christmas beetles when the weather gets warm. They're about the size of your thumbnail and they're stupid as hell. If you leave a light on at night, they come in scores, bumping into you like drunks at a crowded nightclub. I keep a little citronella candle instead to shoo the mozzies. Then I turn on a bright spotlight around on the other side of the house to lure the beetles away from the back deck. Well, last week on Monday, I was out maybe around 10:30 at night just doing my usual. Everything was fine until suddenly the spotlight on the other side of the house goes out. I groaned aloud. I had a spare bulb in the house, but the whole thing was an inconvenience more than anything. Anyways, I went and I got the spare bulb, walked around the side of the house to the light, and well, the bulb wasn't blown, it was gone, unscrewed and nowhere to be seen. Looking around, I heard a weird sort of scraping sound from nearby, like two rocks rubbing together. It started slow and picked up speed, moving fast towards me. I didn't stop to think about it. I just made a beeline for the door and got into the house. Bugger that for a game of soldiers. I locked my door and spent a good 10 minutes just cussing out and turning on every light in the house. I called the cops and told them someone was on my property, but they figured it was just probably some local kids pulling a prank on me. They agreed to send someone out, but they weren't in any hurry. My part of the town is pretty quiet. Nothing really happens here. It's lonely. Out of the way. It's peaceful. Exactly the kind of place I thought I wanted to live. Well, I was having second thoughts, I can tell you that. I couldn't sleep much, even though I was pretty sure the cops wouldn't come till morning. Every time I almost dozed off, I heard that scraping stone sound. I told myself it was a stick falling from a tree or an animal, maybe just shifting boards in the house, but it was definitely stone. Stone rubbing on stone. I peeked out of the window a few times to see if I could see anything, but that was pretty fruitless. A couple of times I thought I saw something, like a couple of eyes moving about, but eyes aren't anything out of the ordinary in the bush. Animals, I thought aloud, just wallabies or something. Cop showed up the next morning about 9 to ask about the night before. Gave me a good fright when he knocked at the door and woke me up, but I sure the hell was glad to see the sun outside my window. He was a black fella named Cohen. I knew him from around town, and he was a nice enough bloke. Always gave a smile and a good day when I passed him on the street. We checked out the spotlight. Bulb missing. No footprints or anything. No footprints or anything weird. No idea where the bulb went. He reckoned it was weird that it wasn't dropped and smashed right under the fitting. Lights like that can get bloody hot if you don't even think about handling them unless they've been turned off for a good while. Not without oven mitts or something on your hands. What kind of teenage vandal carries oven mitts? Anyways, when I got to the sound I heard, the scraping stones, he didn't laugh it off the way I tried to. In fact, he looked pretty bloody serious. Malingee, he said under his breath. Malingee? What the arse is a malingee? I asked. Old kid story. Black fella's been trying to scare kids and keep them from wandering the bush at night. As long your mob, longer probably. Cohen smiled. So how does the story go? I asked, more curious than concerned. Well, the Malingee is a tall fella. His skin is hard like a rock. His legs and arms are bandy-like, makes him walk all funny, so his knees knock and scrape together when he steps. Cohen explained. He didn't take what he I didn't he didn't take what he was saying too seriously though. He was explaining a kid's story. He usually doesn't cause much trouble, not if you get out of the way when you hear the scrapes, but if you don't, well, He ain't all too friendly either. That all? I asked, managing to laugh now that it was obviously just a bit of folklore. Well, that's most of it. Auntie says he got red eyes that you can always see, like fire, and you don't like bright lights all too much. Cohen let out a belly laugh. Don't reckon you pissed off an old Malachi with your spotlight, do you? Seems less than likely, I said, smiling as I walked Cohen to his car. I said goodbye and waved him off as he drove away. I felt better after talking to someone. Being alone too much really screws with your head, especially if you don't live in eyeshot of neighbors. It's pretty easy to feel vulnerable on your own. I spent the rest of the day working from home, got some shopping done, and the rest. I replaced the ball, but decided not to sit outside that night, so I kept it off, passing the next few days mostly the same way. Nothing too weird to report there. Some nights I thought I heard a scrape, thought I saw some eyes out there too. Didn't think too much of it though. It's easy to build things up in your head when you've had a fright. Best not to think about it. I kept inside at night till Saturday, 5 days since the incident with the light. I figured I should stop being such an idiot and make use of my deck again. So that night I was sitting out, about the same time, 10:30, having a smoke and editing some stuff that I'd written for a job I took. I fixed the spotlight so that it was on around the corner, keeping the beetles at bay, and I had my little citronella candle to shoot the mozzies. I was feeling pretty fine until I heard the bulb smash. Light round the side, the light round the side suddenly went dark. It was a quiet moment, but then the night erupted with this gravelly scream that sounded like nothing I had ever heard. That was no bloody teenager. I turned towards the house and the sound came, the scraping stone, slow at first, but picking up speed and hurrying fast around the house towards me. I bolted for the back door and pretty much jumped through as I slammed it behind me. I hardly had time to latch it before the handle began to shake and that goddamn stone scratching was just outside. It must have been smart though, because as soon as it realized the door was locked, it moved towards the window. I stood still. It didn't follow me inside last time, but looking at that window and seeing its face stoop down and smile that lipless, toothy grin at me, well, it put the fear of God in me there and then. The smug bastard didn't hesitate to smash the glass out and reach inside. I didn't really have time to react. I grabbed at my keys, but by the time I turned to make for the front door, it had already half clambered into the house. He was a lanky bastard, maybe 7 or 8 feet tall, spindly and long limbed. It looked almost spider like, with its limbs oddly folding through the window. His skin looked black, or maybe like stone, but those big arse eyes were all I had time to take in properly before I got the hell out of Dodge. Sure as anything, those were the eyes I'd been seeing out my window. Those eyes looked pissed. It screamed horribly and swung its arms at me as I ran for the front door, bursting into the night and slamming it behind me. I was glad I never bothered to park my car inside the garage. Just the thought of having to take the time to open it up was making me piss myself. I pulled the door to my Nissan Patrol, fell in, and just started the engine. The front door burst open in splinters as that god awful Malangi barrels out into the night. That smile, that sickly wide smile it made as it lurched towards me on all fours, the scrape of stone on stone as its knees clicked together. I have no idea how I made it into town without flipping my car. I drove faster that night than I had ever driven in my life. As of now, I'm looking to move to the city. Whoever buys my old house can have whatever I left behind. I sure the hell don't want to go get it. Excuse me. I got a call from my friend this morning, too. He wants me to go camping in the bush. Ha! Bugger that. That was a cool story. Because because I'm not familiar with that, but I assume that's probably actual folklore. Where is my chat? Why can't I see my chat? Is that actual folklore? Hey, Devil Jack, you made it, man. Mr. Reality, are you still there? Never going to Australia. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm never going to Australia because I'll never be able to afford to go to Australia anyways. So she's a raccoon. Haley is not a raccoon. Okay. All right, to the next story on the list. Yeah, Mr. Reality, was that actual folklore, man? Because you're from Australia, is that correct? And my chat disappears again. I don't know if this normally happens with the chat. I'm confused. If you haven't hit the like button, please hit the like button. That'd be awesome. Also, if I don't know if anyone has or not, but if you could tweet this or share it somewhere, whatever the case may be, that'd be awesome. Facebook or something, I don't know. Yeah, Devil Jack got it. Haley's spirit animal is an angel. All right, this next story is another one from Hillbilly Creeper. It's called The Devil's Mask. Thank you, Devil Jack. I appreciate that. The story I'm about to tell you is true, but this particular story is one you'll never find in the history books or online for that matter. A story that was passed down through generations of Native American ancestry. The natives don't really speak about it. You may hear it under the hushed murmurs or whispers, a dark stain on history that we wish not to repeat. It is a mask, but not just any mask. It's called the Devil's Mask. This particular mask is cursed, and whoever possesses it either winds up hurt or worse. You probably are wondering, how did a mask made of evil come to be? I'll tell you exactly word for word something that my people have kept to themselves for far too long, but chose not to discuss it, as I've mentioned. There was an old shaman in the tribe who healed the sick and occasionally brought back the dead. But behind the shaman's kindness was something evil, something too dark to describe. But if I had to put it in easy words, I would have to say that his heart was deeply corrupted by the devil himself. The reason why I say this is because under his people, he would perform terrible rituals by using his own people, sometimes outsiders. The type of rituals he would perform were horrifying, to say the least. If his victims were male, he would castrate them and use their genitalia as an ingredient for a potion. If they were lucky, he would knock them out so they wouldn't feel the excruciating pain of their own testicles being severed from their bodies. If it was a woman, he would violate them horribly, and after he would mutilate their uterus. If they were with child, he would forcibly remove the fetus and use it for his spells. Sometimes he would sacrifice the fetus to his dark master, and if not those two things, he would simply eat it straight from the woman's womb as he would laugh while eating the unborn child. It just kept getting worse through time. Sometimes he would castrate them or mutilate them, or he would remove vital organs. Sometimes the heart or lung, so he would appease his lord Satan. Until one day he was found out by He was found out by a passing young brave who walked towards his tent and heard the gurgling screams coming from it. They were faint, but only loud enough if you had gotten close to hear. The young warrior walked in and discovered the ghastly sight. I started to run to the village elder. When this came to light, when this came to light to the village elder, he had seen his, he had his best warriors catch the shaman and bring him back so he could be judged by his own village. When the shaman was caught, the elder sentenced him to death by beheading. As the shaman awaited death, his village offered one last request. The shaman requested to wear his mask that he had made from the flesh and bone of his victims in the shape of the devil's face. As he put it on, he spoke these words: "Killing me will not make your suffering go away. It will only make it worse. For I have the power of my God, Satan, and as long as I believe his word, I shall live on for eternity." So I lay his head down on a stump, and with one swift swing of an axe he was dead. After he was executed, he was burned along with his mask, but with one problem: the mask didn't burn. No matter how hot they had gotten the flames, it just would not turn to ashes like its owner. So Village Elder took the mask and locked it away to never see daylight. But that day would end. When one of the chief's grandsons got their hands on it and put it on, not even a day later he contracted an illness and died. It did not end with the little boy. Things just got worse. As long as the mask remained in the village, women started to have miscarriages, men suffered from heart attacks and blood loss automatically. Even the other children were not safe. They all contracted the same illness the little boy did a day earlier, and they all died. The village was almost completely wiped out at this point, due to that damn mask. If it wasn't some mysterious illness, it was due to invaders who would come and kill their best warriors and rape their women, killing them afterwards. And for the lucky few who did survive, they were enslaved. All because of that fucking mask. Something had to be done, the elder thought. So he gathered up what was left of the warriors that weren't killed during the invasion and weren't taken by the invaders. He had he had them take that mask as far away from the village as best they could. So they did. They took it to a secluded area where no one could disturb it or remove it from its hiding spot. So they got to work and dug a hole. The hole so deep into the earth that even God himself would have a hard time getting to it. They buried it. Since they were far from home, they decided to set up camp at least a mile from the hiding spot until morning, and that's when they would head back and be rid of the curse for good. But their celebration was cut short, for the next morning, when they went back to make sure it had stayed buried, that's when I that's when they found an empty hole and the mask was nowhere to be found. That's where the story ends. I'm afraid to this day no one knows where that mask is. They don't even care where it is, as long as it never comes back. That meant that everything would be normal again for my ancestors, so I thought, until one day I was in town getting groceries and I passed by an old antique shop. Right there in the window stood a sign that said "Authentic Native American Mask for Sale." And next to the sign was a blood-stained mask with a horrible face and horns protruding from its forehead. That's when my blood turned as cold as ice. I thought to myself that it couldn't be it. That could not be the same mask from the stories. As I looked through the window, as I looked through the shop window, I could have sworn that it was looking right back at me, staring straight into my soul, knowing my fears and thoughts. After standing there for what felt like an eternity, I got the hell out of there and drove home. Before I got to my house, I picked up my cell phone and called my great great grandfather, who was chief of the reservation. I told him that I'd come back. I told him that it had came back, and my great great grandfather asked me what I meant. I told him that the mask, the one from the fucking stories, had found its way home. My really great grandfather stood quiet for a moment on the phone. That's when he began to speak. Where is it, grandson? Tell me, he replied with fear in his voice. I told him it was in a antique shop in town. He then spoke again and told me, whatever you are doing, do it and come by and pick me up. We are going back to that place to end this curse once and for all. So I turned around and went back to his place on the reservation, picked him up, and took him straight into town to the antique shop. About time we got there, an accident had occurred. A fire had broken out at the restaurant next door to the shop and spread to it. Before the fire was extinguished, everything in that entire shop was turned to ashes. I came to find out there were people still inside that had perished in the fire along with everything else. The fireman scouted around for what was left of the people and or items. Not a damn thing survived. The mask was gone, and I know what you're thinking. What if it went up in flames, just like everyone and everything else? But I know it didn't because it didn't burn then. I know for sure as fuck it didn't burn now, and it's still out there waiting to come back, waiting to finish the rest of us off, just like the shaman promised. So if anyone out there sees a Native American devil's mask drenched in blood, get as far away as you possibly can, or you will become its next victim. There's that one. All right. I got more stories that Johnny had sent me. So I will get these ones up. All right. So how's everybody doing tonight? Who's still here? Says we got 10 of us here. Mr. Reality's here. Haley's here. April's here. Canada Koala's here. Devil Jack's here. Forewarning. TS is here. And thank you for subbing me, by the way. Oh, Johnny's still here. All right. Excellent. All right. See, now, yes, the emo high school boy is here. Jesus, Kenny. I am going to read Penny's story next, I suppose. I thought she would be here, and I wanted to wait until she was here to read it, but apparently she just wanted me to read her story and not come to my live stream. God, Penny. All right, this one is by Penny Tails Up. It's called Neon Nylon Strings. I believe it's the story she just got done with, and she's actually a pretty good author. I don't know. Penny's not here. She gave me the story earlier, and then I've been waiting to see if she shows up to read the story, and she hasn't showed up. So I'm just going to read her story, you know? I'm going to feel bad if, like, as soon as I get done and Penny's like, I made it. I'm going to be like, oh, man, what the? But I am going to read the story. Neon Nylon Strings. I've always had an aversion to the cracks between things. You know, tiny dark spaces where a hand barely fits but often ventures in search of something lost. It's always something important you lose in those places, isn't it? Car keys, a watch, a cell phone. Things like that will have you groping the darkness without much thought. The worst for me was the cracks in the couch, those narrow pockets of darkness. It wasn't a rational fear, but knowing that didn't help. I took measures to avoid searching there. obsessively keeping track of my things so I wouldn't lose them in the first place. For example, my keys always hung in the same place, and my cell phone was either charging or clipped to my pants. The television remote took a little more ingenuity. Even though I had a place for it, it always had a way of ending up between the cushions. I know exactly where it was and go fishing in the cracks with a pair of tongs because I couldn't bear sticking my hands down there. I was tired of living like that. I hated myself for being afraid of something so benign. I couldn't help it though. I had an instinct that all the logic in the world couldn't shake. I thought I'd found the perfect solution when I found the string, braided neon nylon. I bought a spool of orange, the color of construction crews and traffic cones. I tied a string around the remote, leaving 6 feet of length to dangle and drape over the coffee table. It worked beautifully. The remote was always easy to find. The string was easy to see. When the remote inevitably found its way between the couch cushions, I'd reel in the string with a strategic angle. It worked well. Why wouldn't I try it with other things too? I bought more neon nylon string, several spools in different colors orange, yellow, and green. I tied them to everything small and easily lost my headphones, my charger, the kitchen scissors, even the salt and pepper shakers. It worked so well, I brought the strategy out of the house too. I tied the yellow strings to things that should always be on my person my phone, my keys, my wallet. If I ever saw yellow, I know I lost something. My pockets were always bulging with balls of yellow string for peace of mind. It was a small price to pay. At work, I tied green strings to things that fell in the space between the wall and the desk the pens, tape, and stapler. It was an orderly chaos, those neon nylon strings. There was a method to my madness, but no one else understood it. When my boss called me into his office about the complaints, I did my best to explain. He didn't get it, but he couldn't make me stop. I could do whatever I wanted, so as long as the items were my personal property and I wasn't trying them on company time. With time, my house remembered. With time, my house resembled an art project rather than a living space. Bright orange strings draped across every surface in every direction, carefully laid out, strategically placed. Walking around became an exercise in balance and flexibility, but still, it was worth it. Of course, there's no such thing as a perfect solution. The problem with this method of organization began to present itself before long. The strings tangled. It became hard to tell which string was attached to what. I spent a lot of time maintaining, untangling everything, and monitoring the cracks between things to see if any thread led into the darkness. I stopped inviting people over. It was too tiring trying to explain. No explanation I could give seemed adequate. I knew it was strange, but it made me feel safer. I was in complete control, the puppet master in this colorful world. There were other problems too. The slightest movement would cause a chain reaction. The strings constantly quivered and rustled softly with only the slightest touch. Even a breeze through an open window was enough to cause constant motion. I always saw movement in my periphery, only to realize it was the string when I turned to check. At night, I'd wake up because several strands would swipe softly against my skin. Once I realized it was just the string, I relaxed and fell back to sleep. But that initial moment, half asleep when you feel an unexpected touch, terrifying. After a while, I got used to the poking and prodding of the string and stopped noticing until the night I woke up on the floor. I wasn't sure why I'd woken up at first, reaching for the reaching for the black light on my nightstand, only to realize I was touching the carpet. Unable to see in the dark, I waited for my eyes to adjust. Before long, the furniture around me took shape, only slightly darker than the blackness around me. Once I was better oriented, I was able to sit up and reach the nightstand. I felt resistance as I found the light, and I realized, with the neon illumination, that I somehow became tangled in the strings. Thick bundles of cord were coiled around my calves and left elbow, pulled taut. The string stretched out the string stretched out the door and down the hall, vibrating and twisting, braiding together as though to form a thick rope. I tried to reach down and untangle myself, but it was too difficult. Panic set in when my body unexpectedly moved. The knots tightened by a sharp pull. I slid across the carpet towards the door, becoming more tangled as I struggled. I caught the door frame with my free hand before I could be yanked out. The door frame creaked in protest as the wood strained and warped. I heard things breaking in another room, and the soft scrape of objects being dragged. All of the strings were moving in one direction. The persistent tug didn't stop. My grip grew weaker as I held on for dear life until my sweaty fingers slipped. Splinters of wood bit into my skin, and once again I was reeled into the deepening darkness down the hall. I fumbled for furniture, anything I could catch on to. I found nothing. I felt like a fish on the end of a line, the catch of some unseen monstrosity in the dark. It was not a gentle current, knocking me into walls and various objects that joined me on this harrowing journey. Raw terror almost sent me into blind panic, but my survival instincts kicked in. Nature and genetics hadn't bestowed me with sharp claws, but I still had teeth, and I used them, tearing like an animal at the strands that had twisted around my elbow. The friction tore at the corners of my mouth, but I ignored the pain and bit down as hard as I could, sawing at the threads until they frayed and snapped. It worked, though my mouth was burning and bloody. Long, limp strands of string hung from the crook of my elbow. Now I had control of both arms. I started ripping off my pajama bottoms, screaming in pain when I dislocated my ankle to slip free from the massive knot. I felt like a coyote in a trap, doing what I could to free myself, even if it meant an injury. Free, I hobbled down the hall on one foot. It was easy enough to dodge the undulating strings as they began to converge into one thick mass. I turned on the hallway light, using a wall as support as I eased myself slowly towards the kitchen. I was in bad shape, covered in rug burn and blood. Adrenaline kept me moving when I shouldn't have been even able to stand. Not much was left of the kitchen. Everything I tied had already been pulled into the tangled body. Unfortunately, the knife block hadn't made it far. Or no, fortunately, the knife block hadn't made it far. For practical reasons, I hadn't tied strings to any of the knives. Though the block had been knocked to the floor, the knives were still safely housed inside. I grabbed the biggest one with my least injured hand. Armed, I limped for the strings into the living room, the source of the pull. When I turned on the lights, I could see objects catching on things, getting stuck. Everything was converging on the couch and the gap between the left armrest and the cushions. Now that I was closer to the source, I could hear it, a sucking sound, wet and smacking as though my couch were enjoying a plate of pasta, noodles of string being slurped into that cramped abyss. Pushing back the disbelief, I got to work with the knife, hacking inelegantly at the writhing neon vein, freeing what possessions I could before they were all sucked down that bottomless maw. I didn't save much, but it was better than nothing. At sunrise, I paid the paper boy $100 to dump the couch on the curb for me, and another 20 so he wouldn't ask questions. Even at a distance from the safety of my window, I could still see those neon nylon strings, a spray of orange twisted into fray ends of rope. It stuck out of the gap only a few inches in length, as if to bait me to reach out and reel in the darkness. I could reclaim all I'd I could reclaim all I'd lost with just a pull of strings, but no, I wouldn't take the bait. I knew something was waiting on the other side to pull me in. No, I'd let my lost things stay lost. For all my fear, I'd somehow neglected to remember that a string can be pulled from both ends. And that's that one. Let's see what this was. Oh, Kenny. Kenny, Kenny, Kenny. All right, so this one's from Kenny the Koala. I have a dark tale for you all. It goes like this. Subscribe to Kenny the Koala, and that is how I lost my virginity to a bagel bite. The end. Yeah, thanks, Kenny, for all your exciting stories. I gotta say, I kind of feel sorry for that bagel bite, though. Just saying. Just saying, bro. Ba-dum-ts. Yes, Haley, I will have to punish you for that pun. Your chat box disappears too. My chat box disappears all the damn time for some reason. It'll be there and then it'll be gone. I don't understand it. Legend has it that Bagel Bite is still there, waiting to take another's virginity. Yes, Mr. Gray. All right, time for another story. Let's see here. Oh, I got that story twice. All right, this one was brought to my attention by Johnny. It's written by Oven Friend. A story to scare my son. Son, we need to have a chat about internet safety. I slowly crumpled down onto the floor next to him. His laptop was open and he was playing Minecraft on a public server. His eyes were locked into the action. Comments scrolled down the side of the screen and chat box. Son, if you could stop playing your game for a minute. He exited the world, closed the laptop, and looked up at me. Dad, is this going to be another cheesy, scary story? What? I faked hurt feelings for a second and then grinned at him. I thought you liked my cautionary tales. He grew up listening to my stories about children who encountered witches, ghosts, werewolves, and trolls. Like many generations of parents, I use scary stories to reinforce morals and teach lessons about safety. Single dads like me should be used to all the parenting tools. Wait, should use all the parenting tools at their disposal. He scrunched his face a little. They were fine when I was 6, but now I'm getting older. They don't scare me anymore. They seem kind of silly. If you're going to tell a story about the internet, can you make it really, really scary? I squinted at him incredulously and folded he folded his arms. Dad, I'm 10. I can handle it. Okay, I'll try. I began. Once upon a time, there was a boy named Colby. His expression indicated he wasn't impressed with the terror of the introduction. He sighed deeply and settled for one of Dad's cheesy stories. I continued. Colby went online and joined several children's websites. After a while, he started talking to other kids in game and on the message boards. He made friends with another 10-year-old boy named Helper 23. They liked the same video games and shows. They laughed at each other's jokes and they explored new games together. After several months of friendship, Colby gave Helper 23 6 diamonds in game that they were playing. This was a very generous gift. Kobe's birthday was coming up, and Helper 23 wanted to send him a cool present in real life. Colby figured it wouldn't hurt to give Helper 23 his home address as long as he promised not to tell it to any strangers or grown ups. Helper 23 swore he wouldn't tell anyone else, not even his own parents, and set about mailing the package. I paused the story and asked my son, "Do you think that was a good idea?" "No," I said, no, he said, shaking his head vigorously. In spite of himself, he was getting into the story. Well, neither did Kobe. Kobe felt guilty about giving away his home address, and his guilt began to grow and grow. By the time he put his pajamas on the next night, his guilt and fear were larger than anything else in his life. He resolved to admit the truth to his parents. The punishment would be steep, but it was worth it to have a clear conscience. He squirmed in his bed as he waited for his parents to tuck him in. My son knew the scary part was coming up. In spite of his tough talk, he leaned forward, wide-eyed. I spoke quietly and deliberately. He heard all the noises of the house. The washing machine bounced around in the laundry room. Branches scraped against the brick outside of his room. His baby brother cooed in the nursery. And there were some other noises he couldn't quite pinpoint. Finally, his dad's footsteps echoed down the hall. "Hey, Dad," he called out nervously. I have something to tell you." His dad stuck his head into the doorway at a weird angle. In the darkness, his mouth didn't seem to move and his eyes were all wrong. "Yes, son?" The voice was way off, too. "Are you okay, Dad?" the boy asked. "Uh-huh," sung the father in his strangely affected voice. Colby pulled his covers up defensively. Is Mom around?" Just a second, sorry.
Here I am.
His mom's head popped up into the doorway below Dad's. Her voice was an unnatural falsetto.
Were you about to tell us that you gave your home address to Helper 23? You shouldn't have done that. We told you never to give your personal information on the internet.
She continued.
He wasn't really a kid. He just pretended to be one. Do you know what he did? He came to our house, broke in, and murdered both of us just so he could spend time with you.
A fat man in a wet jacket emerged in the child's doorway, holding the two severed heads. Colby shrieked and gasped as the man dropped the heads on the ground, unsheathed his knife, and moved into the room to work on the boy. My son screamed too, his twisted hands defensively over his face, but we were just getting started with this story. After several hours, the boy was almost dead and his screams had become whispers. The killer noticed the wailing of a baby in another room and removed his knife from Colby. This was a special treat. He had never murdered a baby before and was excited about the prospect. Helper 23 left Colby to die and followed cries through the house like a homing beacon. In the nursery, he walked to the crib, picked the baby up, and held it in his arms. He moved towards the changing table to get a better look, but as he held the baby, the crying died down. The baby looked up and smiled. Helper 23 had never held a baby, but he gently bounced it in his arms like a pro. He wiped his bloody hands on the blanket so he could stroke the baby's cheek. "Hey there, sweet little guy." The beautiful rage of sadism melted into something warmer and softer. He walked out of the nursery, took the baby home, and named him William and raised him as his very own. After I finished the story, my son was visibly shaken. Between ragged staccato breaths, he stammered, but Dad, my name's William. I gave him the classic dad wink and tousled his hair. Of course it is, son. William ran up the stairs to his bedroom in a fury of sobs. But deep down, I think he really liked the story. You said this is so relaxing in a weird way. So, yeah, that one was story of my life. uh, I swear to God. Okay, I'm. Is this an actual story? All right, Kenny. I know for a fact that this is going to be. Uh oh. What the hell? Oh, I see what happened. My bad. My bad. Something got weird. All right, hold on. All right. Now, Kenny, how fucked up is this story you sent me on the reel? Huh? Because I'm about to read this, and I can't even see my chat right now for some reason because it went blank again on me. Is it like a legit story that's appropriate for me to read? All right, April. Haley, you should go to sleep. You don't have to stay up the whole time. I love you. It's okay. I appreciate that you come in here when it's so late for you, but you don't have to lose sleep over it, okay? I love you. I know what you're going to say. You're going to tell me to shut the fuck up. All right. Why is this fucking ad all up in my grill? All right. Hey, what up, Leonard? Well, thanks for coming, man. I'm just reading stories and things of that nature. So if you want to just hang out and listen to me reading some stories and things like that, that'd be awesome, man. Talk to the people here. If you like scary stories, then you can check out their stuff as well. And everybody can support each other and stuff like that if you're into that. This is a story from Kenny the Koala. I'm not sure what to expect here. So if you are traumatized by this story, just let me apologize in advance. It's called The Sound of Birds Calling. God, get this ad out of my face. All right. I like walking at night because you can do stuff you can't normally. You can walk in the middle of the road and no one honks at you or tries to hit you or anything. One time a guy did that to me, tried to hit me, I mean. I was thinking I didn't hear him. I was thinking and I didn't hear him, so he came up next to me and tapped me with his bumper, and I fell down. Now I walk at night. The only things out other than me are the bird people. The first time I saw one, it was right before the first big snow. All the lights from the town were bouncing off the sky like it was a big ceiling, and all I saw was someone standing out in the old vacant lot where a burnt out store used to be. He was looking around and then scratching the dirt with one finger. I thought maybe he was drawing something, but it was pretty peculiar to be drawing something out in the middle of the night. Then, all of a sudden, he leaned his head back and he made a bird call. It sounded just like one of those little dusty looking birds that hang out with a million other ones in the bushes. He looked like he was waiting for something. And then he went off towards Maple. Just then a raccoon knocked over some cans and someone stuck their head out of the window and saw me. So I had so I had to run home before they recognized who I was. The next night, I got up to leave for a walk because Ma and Pop were fighting again. My sister, Annie Lou, wanted to go with me, but I said no. I wasn't sure where I wanted to go, so I went down towards the park. I sat on the swings, but they were creaky, so I sat on the grass instead and I just listened. I heard a little bird somewhere calling. I remember that guy from the night before, and I saw a lady come up the road, walking in the middle of it like I do. She was making that little bitty bird call and kind of hopping along. I liked her like her shoes were tied together. Then a man, not the same one from the other night, came out from behind the city hall building and he called back the same way. I got up real quiet and hid in a bush. All right, sorry, I lost my place. They met up by the monkey bars and they stood real close together, and the lady was nodding her head all the time, like she was agreeing with what the man was saying. They were talking in bird language to each other. After a while, they left in different directions. After they were gone, I got up and went to the place where they were standing. I stayed there just touching the grass and thinking until it started to get light out, and then I went home. Annie Lou started having bad nightmares, so I'd go and sit with her instead of walking. I opened the window in her room and listened instead. You can hear them if you listen. I think most people just ignore them, or maybe they don't hear them because no one ever says anything about it. They're always real quiet, the bird people, but they move around all strange. The hopping lady I saw a lot, almost every night. There's a little fellow with a missing arm who shakes his head real fast. He's like he's saying, no, no, no. And another lady who bends in half, but sideways like an R. I've seen a few up by the church under the angel statues. If you hear them chirping, then one by one they'll come closer wherever the first one was, and they stand around in a big group and talk in bird language. I found an old bird call I found an old bird call in Pop's junk box, but it sounded like a duck, and the bird people don't sound like that. I asked him once after work if he could show me how to do a little sparrow call, but he just told me to go on, son, I'm busy, even though all he was doing was sitting on the porch and looking at nothing. Davy next door can do a whistle with his fingers, so I got him to teach me how to do it, and it sounded pretty good. One night after that, I got out and went down where the bird people were, and I hid myself a big bush, and heard I hid myself behind a big bush and I made that call to see what they would do. They stopped talking and looked all around like they were nervous. I did it again, and one of the men made a call back, but it was different. It was kind of more drawn out. I called back, but he started doing it over and over, and soon all of them were doing it. My heart started beating real fast. I saw a big woodpecker trapped in our sun porch one summer. It was beating itself to death on the windows and making that same sound. Pop caught him and put him in a tree, but when I went back later, he was dead. I turned and ran back home. After that, I didn't talk to them anymore. I just watched. After about a month, I started naming them. The lady who hopped, I called Baby because she sounded real little. There was a big man that I called Buster because he flailed around a lot, and I wondered if maybe sometime he'd bust someone a good one. Then there was a tiny little gimpy man with something wrong with his leg, so I called him Stump. I don't think they knew I was hanging around, or maybe they just got used to me. What I liked was they seemed happy to be around each other. I stopped going to school much. Sometimes I'd have dreams about them. They'd see me and they'd let me into the circle. I couldn't understand them, but it was nice being with them that way, even if, even if in real life they'd never let me do it. Then one morning, Pop caught me coming home. He must have gone into my room for some reason and seen that I wasn't there. He hollered at me and cussed, and Ma got real mad at him for yelling, so she hurried us into my room. Annie Lou was crying when she fell asleep, and she didn't wake up till Pop came in later to nail my window shut. After he left, Annie Lou asked if my friends were going to come visit me tonight. I asked what she meant, and she said sometimes when I was asleep, she'd hear birds outside of the window, and she'd see people standing in the yard. She said they were always looking in my window and that they just stood around and took turns watching me. I went and put my ear to the window, and the glass was cool and nice. I stayed there for a long time and listened for the sounds of bird calling. And that's the end. Alrighty. So I believe what's this other story I got from okay, that one was the sleep scientist one. So this one is the next one. So that bird story was kind of odd. It was a pretty odd one. It wasn't really scary though, really, because the bird people didn't seem like they were like angry or anything really. They were just kind of weird, you know? You never actually read the bird story? Is that what you're saying, Kenny? Or you just found a random story and you were like, here, read this. Well, that's what I do. Literally, that's what I do for my videos. So everybody, thanks for coming, and I am going to find something else to read here. I got two stories. I am a sleep. What? This is a hell of a title. I am a sleep scientist, and something terrible has followed my latest patient into the sleep lab tonight. I'm scared I won't make it until morning. So I guess I'll read this one. I mean, the title alone is a paragraph, so it has to be good. So this one was written by Heliowell, I think is what it says. I apologize if I got that wrong. So again, I'm a sleep scientist, and something terrible has followed my latest patient into the sleep lab tonight. I'm scared I won't make it until morning. I'm a sleep scientist, and I have to spend the night alone in a sleep lab. I performed this overnight vigil hundreds of times before. I'm comfortable with the sleep lab. It's like second home to me. I think I spend more nights here than I do in my own bed. The room is dark. It has to be, of course, so that no light goes into the sleep room next door. And I stared at the flickering screen in front of me. The lab computer records and monitors, excuse me. The lab computer records and monitors the patient's brain activity, EEG brain waves, never ending wiggly lines dancing across the screen. First, I think I need to explain what the sleep lab is exactly. The room I am in right now is known as the monitoring room. It is next door to the sleep rooms. There is a window installed into the wall of the monitoring room, which allows us to look directly into the sleep room without having to go in. The good thing is that my main job The good thing is that my main job through the night usually is simply to stay awake and to keep an eye on things, monitor the patients and their brainwave activity on screen, make sure everything is ticking along as it should be. There are infrared cameras mounted on the sleep room walls so I can see the patient on another monitor, make sure everything is okay. I have to make sure the brainwave recording is going well, that the recording wires are still attached to the patient's scalps, and that the recording is free from noise and interference. Through all this, the main job is usually just staying awake and alert. To keep myself awake, I'm allowed to browse the internet on my laptop. As long as the speakers are switched off, of course, and on the condition that I keep vigilant eye on the patients and their signals. Later on comes the mentally taxing part of analyzing their data, but overnight, I don't have to worry about that. yet. Sometimes watching the EEG brainwaves flit continuously across the screen can be dangerously hypnotic. I have to fight to keep myself awake. Tonight, though, tonight is different. Tonight, there's no danger of me nodding off. I'm wide awake and I'm terrified. There is only one patient in the sleep lab tonight. He's in a coma, so I'm practically alone in the building. There's no one who I can go to, no one to wake up. That's what makes tonight even more unnerving. Normally, I would never wake up a patient unless protocol required it, but these aren't normal circumstances. If there were someone else around, sometimes I monitor multiple patients at the same time, I would have awoken them by now. Not to adjust their wires, not to give them their meds, not to check up on them. Simply because I need someone here with me, because things are getting out of control. Anyhow, he's the only one here, and he's in a coma. So I could scream and shout all I want. He won't stir. And all I have is an unconscious body for company. That's why I've come here to reach out to you. Normally, I like the darkness of the sleep lab. It's comforting, it's what I'm used to. So tonight, even though I could have turned the lights on at the beginning of the night, I wanted to, if I wanted to, the patient wouldn't have woken up, even if I were to shine a flashlight with the brightness of 1,000 suns straight into his eyes. Instead, I just sat here quietly, comfortably in the dark. A matter of habit, I suppose. Let me get one thing clear. I have seen all manner of things during my time working here, a mixture of scary and panic inducing. I'm a neuroscientist specializing in sleep research, and my professional interests lie in characterizing and trying to find new treatments for sleep disorders. I've had multiple patients with sleep paralysis who wake up in hysterics, telling me about the demons that tried to kill them, draw them out on paper to show me diagrams of terrible faces that haunt them in the night. They point out frantically and urgently where the demon had stood in the room. I've had countless children and who have woken up screaming, blood curdling screams, the kind of sound that makes your hair stand on end, suffering from night terrors. I've had people sleepwalking, throwing things around. Sometimes they've even managed to rip the wires out of their head, which is very painful because they're glued on and still not woken up. One man, still unconscious, cut his own wrist with a shaving razor and slept through it, even as I bandaged him up and phoned for help. I have had patients stop breathing suddenly mid dream. I've had to rush in and perform CPR. Sometimes some people somehow manage to open the door of the sleep room, wander through the corridor, and come into the monitoring room. Some of them trying to attack me, hit me, bite me, all while asleep. Hold on, I need to take a drink of water before I continue. What I'm saying is, I've seen a lot. I've had to remain level headed through it all and focus on the job. They rip they rip their wires out. I need to put them back on and make sure the EEG recording stays online. They start sleepwalking. I can't wake them up. I need to make sure their wires are still in place, that we're getting a good signal, and that the infrared camera is capturing everything so we can analyze the data. Usually, I just need to make sure they are confined to the sleep room and can't hurt themselves or me. Child screaming? No big deal. It can be a little creepy at first, but I've seen it 1,000 times before. Just make sure the signal is okay. Make a note of the time and duration of the night terror, and then it's carry on as usual. I need to be focused on I need to be focused and to concentrate on the central aim, ensuring that the patient data collection continues uninterrupted and keeping a corresponding meticulous written record of any unusual events. After all, that's why they're there, these patients, so we can diagnose them, so that we can get them the treatment and medication they need to get on with their lives, so we can help them break out of the bubble of terror that engulfs them every night, created by their minds. When it goes awry, the slumbering brain can be an evil, self destructive thing. My job is to help rein it in. I'm actually used to this routine, these strange, tumultuous nights, more so than a lot of my colleagues. You see, I became a sleep neuroscientist because of my older brother. I can't remember when it started, but I remember I would wake up regularly hearing him muttering and talking in his sleep. Sometimes he would sit upright and scream. Other times he would whimper, his voice coming out whiny and afraid. It was the whimpering that scared me more than the screaming for some reason. During the day, he was my big brother. We'd play basketball together. He'd buy me popsicles from the ice cream truck with his pocket money, help me cross the road, and tie my shoes. He's only a couple of years older than me, but 2 years could be a huge gulf during childhood. He was my hero, but at night he became this frightened little boy who lashed out at me when I tried to wake him up. As the days went by, though, I became used to it. When we got older, he didn't grow out of it, as most children do. It got worse. He started experiencing a jumble of symptoms: night terrors, sleep paralysis, sleepwalking, and also what I now know as REM disorder. It didn't get better. Then his visions and hallucinations began to seep into the daytime. What beasts and terrors had been confined to his dreamscapes now haunted him during wakefulness as well. He was diagnosed with sleep disorders combined with schizophrenia. I wanted to help him. It took a toll on every part of his life. He was more intelligent than me with a potential bright future ahead, but he fell behind in his studies, unable to concentrate. I started to study the brain for him because I wanted to understand what was happening inside his mind. So I began on my quest to study the brain, to unlock its secrets, because I wanted to help him and others like him to escape. I wanted him to return to being himself. My brother, unfortunately, never really improved. No amount of drugs could help him, and he insisted that this was because his visions weren't due to a disorder, they were real. He would often shout and scream that drugs couldn't take something away if it were real. As I progressed in my scientific studies, which I had embarked upon for the very reason to help him, ironically, it caused a rift between us. I thought he would be proud when I got my PhD, but he almost saw my scientific endeavors as a betrayal, as a sign that I didn't believe him. I guess the fact that I'm his younger brother doesn't help much. It doesn't matter how many qualifications I attain, how many scientific publications I write, how respected I am among my academic peers. My brother will never listen to me. He refused to set foot in my lab or try any of the treatments I recommend. We haven't spoken in years. However, what I'm about to narrate, what I've been through tonight, isn't about my brother. What I've experienced these last few hours, though, has, well, suffice to say, for the first time in my life, I'm reconsidering my brother's point of view. A few days ago, we had a very perplexing case come into the sleep lab. The patient is a man in his mid 20s who had lapsed into an atypical coma a few days before he was transferred to our facility. The patient's older brother accompanied him and sat in the sleep room on a chair next to his bed, concerned, holding his hand. I'll admit, one of the reasons I took such an interest in this case is because it struck a personal chord with me. It reminded me of my brother and I. Some of my colleagues were hesitant to take on this patient for observation. The reason is this patient presents with a whole list of strange and unusual symptoms. The patient's brother reports that the patient had a slight head trauma a few days before he went into the coma. Not substantial enough to cause significant head injury, but it probably did contribute to his symptoms, we thought. His brother later tells us that the patient actually documented the hours prior to his succumbing to the coma. He was suffering from extreme delusions and hallucinations. The patient's leg is what should, in theory, provide a diagnostic clue. When I was placing wires on the patient. We have to place sensors all around the chest, abdomen, and legs to monitor breathing patterns and leg movements. The patient's left leg is something that truly shocked me. It seemed necrotic. I never seen anything like it. The team from pathology have taken several biopsies and sent them in for analysis at other medical centers and specialist laboratories around the world. Endocrinologists have been consulting in a case it's a freak hormonal disorder. Dermatologists have examined him in case it's an infection or some strange injury or burn on his skin. Experts in tropical diseases have flown over to investigate in the case, and it's a poison from a bite in case it's a poison from a bite or something similarly obscure. We have been through and every avenue has been looked into. His blood work, pathology report, everything is coming out clean. Whatever this is, we don't have an answer. We don't have this disease categorized yet. We don't have the tools to detect it because we don't know what it is. And I need another drink. Don't know what it is. What is it? Okay. The professor in charge of our lab has a theory that the patient may have been exposed to some airborne pathogen, which infected his peripheral and central nervous system. The symptoms in his leg are spreading slowly, most likely through his nerves. It may explain the unusual brain activity we're picking up on. If it has an infection in his brain, too. What's strange is his brain waves aren't typical of a coma patient. But all his other physical attributes are. His pupils are unresponsive to light, and he is unresponsive to all stimuli applied, including painful stimuli, except for the reflex responses. He is a medical mystery, and he's causing a sensation around the world in the medical and scientific circles. He may hold some key to some obscure disease, and by extension, a new discovery. We're looking at uncharted ground here. But right now, he's here, alone in the lab with only me to monitor him and track his brain activity. Some people aren't sure of whatever disease he had. Some people aren't sure if whatever disease he has is contagious, but we don't think so. Nonetheless, I took one look at his brother, holding his hand and looking forlorn and desperate. I just knew that I had to help in whatever way I could. So this afternoon, one by one, my colleagues at the lab checked out for home. Soon, there was just me left, staying overnight alone to monitor the patient. I've done this, as I say, many times before. It's the usual routine. I peer in for a moment through the window into the sleep room. I double check the signals, ensuring the cameras were working. Satisfied with everything, I made myself comfortable in my chair and settled in for a long night ahead. I turned on my personal laptop and checked emails and so on. Can't use the speakers or headphones on the chance that the patient calls out or makes a noise during the night. Can't risk missing something like that. I was reading something online when I first heard footsteps coming from the corridor. I didn't think anything of it. Probably one of the patients had woken up and had used the restroom or something. I was immersed in the article I was reading when suddenly everything seemed to stand still and the realization hit me. There were no other patients in the sleep lab tonight, just me and Coma Guy. My head turned to the monitor instantly, in the dubious hope that maybe the patient had woken up. No, still on the bed, unresponsive like a log. The footsteps were in the corridor, and they seemed to be going towards the sleep room. I swiveled in my chair and scrambled to the door. In long, hurried steps, almost leaping to it, I opened it and peered out. There was no one in the corridor. Just to be safe, I checked the nearby rooms, including the vacant sleep rooms. All the doors leading to the sleep lab were locked. Only my staff security swipe card can open those. I was safe and sealed in. It had to be my imagination. Sighing, I returned to the monitor room. Another quick check on the recordings were in order, and I settled into my laptop routine again. With the computer fans humming away and the steady beat of the patient's heart rate and nothing interesting online, I was on the verge of sleep. That almost unconscious phase was actually when you're nearly into stage one sleep, the first stage of non rapid eye movement, the NREM sleep, in case you're interested. The steady sound of the patient's heart rate is what almost lulled me into a trance. That's the heart rate that woke me up again with a start. The patient's heart rate had spontaneously increased very fast. I looked up eagerly at the EEG signal. It had changed, gotten quicker, responsive to something. Was the patient waking up? I stared at the infrared camera image, which was blurry, so I got up and went to look through the window. Nothing. There was no movement, no change in the patient's consciousness, but his breathing and heart rate had increased. His brain activity had changed within the coma. Was he experiencing hallucinations? I stared at the stationary figure on the bed for some time in the darkness, and then something within the room moved. At first, I thought it was the shadow of the cabinet on the other side of the room, but the shadow was moving, creeping, a black mass creeping slowly towards the bed. I blinked, trying to be sure of myself. It was so dark that sometimes the mind creates shapes in the darkness and shadows, illusions. No, it did seem to really be there. It was elongating now, as though something, this black thing, had been on all fours and was now standing up to stand over the patient in his bed. An intruder. Someone here to attack the patient, or just someone mentally unstable who had somehow found a way in? Perhaps they had tailgated and simply Perhaps they had tailgated and slipped behind a member of the staff as they entered through the security protected doors. Hey! I shouted, banging on the window. Hey, who's there? You're not supposed to be in there. The figure stood unmoved. I went to the back door, through the corridor, and into the sleep room. I turned on the light. There was no one there. There couldn't have been time to escape. If they'd exited the sleep room, they would have run into me in the corridor. How odd. Most likely a trick the tr- blah, most likely a trick of the darkness. Just to be certain, though, I checked underneath the bed in the in and in the ensuite bathroom and in the cabinet just for good measure. Everything was in order. I looked at the patient in bed. I was now standing over the bed in the same way I'd imagined the shadow had done. The patient's breathing had returned to its normal pace. When I went back to the monitor room and I looked at the screen displaying the camera view, we're able to play back video without affecting live recording. So I rewound the recording a few times. There was nothing on there. No shadow. Everything was just like usual. Empty room with the patient in the bed. Nothing moving until I entered a few minutes later to check up. I sat down my laptop again, not really able to concentrate anymore on the article I had been reading. I decided I needed some light relief. I went to YouTube and started watching some videos with the speakers turned off. So I came to Reddit and I discovered /r/silent videos, a lifesaver for my work situation. Soon I was able to relax and was engrossed. I don't know how long I don't know how long passed in this way, an hour or so, I think. My eyes went back to the recording screen to make sure all was well. There was no EEG signal. It was flatlining, no heart signal, no breathing signal. My heart jumped into my throat. The patient was dead, and I missed it? I should have done something. What had happened? Oh God, what a fool I was getting wrapped up in videos. I looked at the camera feed, and the patient was gone. The bed was empty. In the midst of the rush of adrenaline and confusion, and yes, also fear, though at that point I was more afraid of losing my job for negligence than anything else, I ran into the sleep room and turned on the light. The bed was tousled, and though the participant had just walked off, but that was impossible. The door had been closed, and the outer door had a security lock. Only those with a swipe card could get out. Feeling jittery and trying to stave off the thoughts that I was going to get into a lot of trouble because I had my let my guard down and let the patient walk off, I looked in the adjoining restroom. Nothing. Feeling stupid, I looked in the clothes cabinet. Nothing. I got on my hands and knees, the carpet feeling rough under my palms, and looked under the bed. The patient was lying under the bed. I let out a sigh of relief. "Hello?" I said. No response. His eyes were closed. Without thinking about it, I shuffled sideways, halfway under the bed, and used one hand to slowly drag the man out. He was still unconscious. The wires were still attached to his head, but had been unplugged at the other end from the recording machine, so they trailed long, unattached wires like dreadlocks from his head. Heaving and panting, I somehow managed to get this dead weight back into bed. I then set about plugging everything back into where it should be, and then covered him with a blanket again. I went back into the monitoring room, and the signal was back and recording. The signal indicated that he was indeed still comatose. Now, how had he managed to get out of bed? He had regained consciousness, unplugged his wires, and then hidden under the bed for some reason? Perhaps scared at the new surroundings, and then relapsed back into the coma. While they're highly unlikely, but the only solution to this conundrum that I could think of. This was also strange. Only one way to find out: the video, visual evidence. With that, we'd know exactly what happened. I clicked rewind on the video feed. The past hour was just blank, dead screen. I felt winded. I sat back on my chair heavily. There must be some rational explanation for this. I went to the door that opened into the corridor and closed it. It locked automatically, so only I can open it to get out with my card just to be safe. So I thought it might be a good idea to check with security services. They're around via phone access 24/7 for any lone workers at our facility. So it might be a good idea to tell them about the footsteps and all that, so they could send someone over. Before I had thought this was excessive. I don't like to cause a fuss over nothing, but now, well, perhaps someone was playing a prank on me. Now I just wanted someone here with me, some reassurance. I picked up the office phone and there was no dial tone. Never mind, I took my mobile phone out of my pocket. No signal. Odd. I tried changing position, etc., but it was no use. I went onto my email to message a colleague to see if I could get them to ring security for me. This email could not be sent. Please check your connection and try again. The internet connection was definitely still there. I loaded a YouTube video. It was playing fine. I clicked on another video er- and screaming erupted, startling me. To say I was annoyed is an understatement. Had someone put a screamer into one of these videos? I hit the mute button and it made no difference. My laptop was already on mute. I got to my feet, my head spinning with the unexpected screaming. It was unrelenting. I checked the EEG screen. Brainwave activity was as before, comatose, but his chin muscle signal was active. It meant that his mouth was moving, but the infrared camera image was too grainy to tell. So I glanced at the window into his room. Indeed, his mouth was wide open, his chest muscles straining. He was screaming, unrelentingly, but his brain signals, he was still in a coma. Before I could mentally process this, the patient sat upright in bed. Here's the thing: there was no activity in his orbital frontal, parietal, or motor regions. Basically, the brain areas that should control his decision to sit up, plan the movement, and signal his muscles to move were all quiet. All were inactive. By the look of the signal, his brain wasn't actually controlling his movements. What the hell? Maybe there was something wrong with the signal. Maybe there was an error with the recording equipment. I ran into the door, which I'd closed just a few minutes ago. It wouldn't open. I tried swiping my card. It wouldn't open. No beep, nothing. I went to switch on the light. Maybe I wasn't aiming the card at the sensor properly in the dark. The light wouldn't come on. The light was just completely out. There was a pane of frosted glass at the side of the door that opens from the monitoring room into the corridor. Perhaps I could smash it and squeeze through. I lifted the chair above my head and steadied myself, planting my feet firmly, and got ready to swing. Someone pushed me. Someone shoved me forcibly away from the door. I toppled over, the chair falling from my grip onto me in a confused, tumultuous movement where I couldn't tell where my head was in relation to my feet and the floor. I managed to untangle myself, pushing the chair off me, not thinking about the malicious force that had just thrown me onto the floor, taking it all in stride, adrenaline, making me incredulous perhaps. Then the recording computer monitors went dark. The EEG signals and the camera feed screens both just pop, and they were gone. I was plunged into greater darkness. I ran to the window to look at the patient. He was sitting upright in bed, still screaming. He had been screaming relentlessly throughout all this. I stared at him and banged on the window, trying to get him to wake up. This wasn't a normal coma. Perhaps I could wake him up if I tried. I don't know what the hell this was. I was willing to throw all protocol out the window now. And then someone closed the blind from the other room. I just stood there, staring at it. I didn't see a hand pull the blind down, but just the jerking movement of the dark blind being pulled from the bottom of the window pane. Something else might have shouted out, asked who was there. I don't know why, but I just didn't. Maybe maybe because I knew it would be no use. I never thought I would type this, but I knew then that this wasn't a human I was dealing with. I just felt suddenly drained. I went meekly, aimlessly, and sat down in my chair facing my laptop. It seemed that electricity had gone from the building somehow, at least from the recording room. I can't check anywhere else. That that should mean that the security doors automatically unlock, but they haven't. I'm trapped in here. The only reason I can still access the internet is because my laptop was fully charged. I've tried emailing many people. I've tried signing into Skype. I've tried messaging on Facebook, but I always get an error message. There's no signal on my phone. In desperation, I tried posting on Reddit. The submission box somehow still works, and so here I am. The patient is in the room next door. He keeps screaming on and off. He is in a coma or he is awake now. I don't know. I almost don't want to know. And now and then screams an actual word, a strange word, a few foreign syllables over and over. I don't know what he's saying. I have no idea what's going on. There's no explanation for what has happened, not that I can tell. I have a feeling that this, whatever it is, has its sights set on the patient alone and just wants me to keep out of its way. I have no choice but to oblige. I'm out of options. I just need to make I just need to make it through the rest of this night. It seems to stretch out before me, never ending. When morning comes, if I make it out alive, I'm going to go visit my brother and I'm going to apologize to him. An update, sort of. Someone PM'd me to let me know that it's likely the patient's backstory. I have still not read it. Oh, it's a link. I'm not going to read this because I'm not going to get into all that. Whew, that was a seemed like a long story. It was pretty cool though. That was a pretty cool story. Huh? Don't tell me how to live my life. I do what I want. I'm fine. Don't worry about me. Besides, I still got at least one more story to read. What was your traumatic experience, Kenny? What do you mean what I've been drinking in this bottle? Don't you judge me, Johnny? Fireball. No, it's water. Around here, Devil Jack, we call it ethanol. It's not milk. That's not milk. It's lemonade from my colonoscopy bag. All right. This story, yes, Haley. Thank you for sticking around, though, Haley. I love you. You get some rest. I'm going to read one more story here. I love you too, Haley. Oh, you're right. Not a colonoscopy bag. That's rough. I don't even know how you get a bag of those, right? All right. So this story, Jack. Good night, Haley. I don't know if you're gone already or not, but good night. I love you. All right. This one is written by Throw Far, Far Away AZ. It's called What the Fuck is Going On in Pinal County, Arizona? Let me see how long this one is, real quick. Oh, this one ain't that long. I'm going to begin this by saying that I chose this online community because it has the exposure of over 1.4 million people. If anyone reading this is in or knows someone in Mammoth, Arizona, please contact me immediately via this Reddit username. I also posted this on my website. I run a blog about cold cases, but for some reason I can't see it. I've tried posting it at least 15 times, but I'm not getting anywhere, so I really hope this post uploads. I live in Mammoth, Arizona, and nothing has ever happened here worth writing about because, well, Mammoth has a population of around 1,500. Okay, Kenny, you gonna jump off a bridge? Anyways. And my chat disappeared. So I'll just go back to reading. 11 days ago, on the 3rd, an older woman who runs a home daycare in my town was found dead in her bathroom by a parent who was picking up his daughter. The kids were all really agitated and told the police that Mrs. Booker, the deceased, had been yelling at them and bleeding from her eye before she went into the bathroom and collapsed in her bathtub. Sad and unpleasant, but not really news. But a day later, one of the daycare babies developed a rash and started bleeding from her ear. She died 12 hours later, and so did 8 other kids from that daycare, all with similar symptoms. This started a shitstorm in my town. In a town of 1,500 people, attempts to keep people unaware and calm were an utter failure. It was on Facebook by the following day. 9 people who had been at the hospital when the kids started to trickle in also started exhibiting these symptoms. I'm told none lasted more than a few days. By last Friday, 18 people had indirect 18 people who had indirect contact with the children were reported missing or dead of natural or unknown causes. All had exhibited similar symptoms just before the deaths. It was at this point that I became directly affected. My sister returned from Oro Valley, the closest hospital, a complete wreck. She had gone to visit her friend's new baby and upon arriving had been informed that both her friend and her baby had died. Everything I just told you was told to her by a frightened nurse. I fact checked what I could. My sister was literally hysterical. She was speaking a full octave higher than usual and twice the speed. I have never seen her act like that before. Her shoulders and arms had bruises so big that I thought maybe she'd been in a car accident on the way home. She told me she didn't know where she had gotten them, and when I tried to put her to bed, she freaked out and started screaming at me that my bedroom was too hot. I took her temperature, which was 102.8. I convinced her to go to bed. I fell asleep on the couch shortly after, waiting for a call back from our towns and me. I woke up to my phone going off. I had 7 texts from friends of mine all reporting the same thing. Entire families were being found beaten to death all over Mammoth. Blood, bruises, nails, and teeth missing, hair ripped out, all of them. I heard reports of anywhere from 14 to 55 dead bodies, depending on who you were talking to. In a state of complete shock, I did the only thing I could do really well on autopilot. I wrote an article about it for my blog. I made some calls around the city, but my usual contacts weren't picking up. I went to check on my sister, and she was bleeding from her ear heavily. Between that and the bruising, I started to wonder if these were actually home invasions at all. I called the I called the 24-hour care in town, but no one picked up. I didn't want to risk driving her back to Oro Valley. I then tried 911, which also rang endlessly. I called my friend in Oro who works for a legit news agent, and she told me that they were reporting Northwest Medical was running a skeleton crew because most of the medical staff had either called in sick or been found dead in their homes. She said she'd seen tanks in Oro. I woke up the next morning and my sister was gone. I don't even know where she is, and I'm too scared to go looking for her. I have called the CDC multiple times, but every time I call, the same woman answers. The first time, she took a statement and she said she'd get back to me. Every subsequent time I've called, she immediately puts me on hold and she never comes back to the line. This morning, my contact at the police department finally called me back. He told me the death toll is incalculable at this point, and that and that they are being iced out by both the state and federal governments, at this point, with one exception. 2 people from the CDC showed up yesterday. My contact overheard them talking about Mrs. Booker's cancer treatments as if it were relevant. He doesn't know if it is, but he hopes I can make something out of it. I can't. I don't know about Oro, but my estimation for Mammoth itself is around 40 dead after showing the same symptoms. I haven't seen any of this on the news, which I've been watching religiously. Why not? We have been told the safest place for us right now is inside our homes. I haven't seen a car pass down my street in 2 days. I'm scared. My sister is still missing, but I'm too afraid to look for her or go into the room she was sleeping in. My hair is falling out from stress. I've been smoking like crazy. This morning I noticed a bruise on my arm. I know my immune system is compromised and I'm too afraid to leave my house. I called my parents in Tuscan and left a message, but they haven't called back. The last I heard from my friend in Oro was Saturday morning. She said she texted to tell me that they had started to find bodies lying in the streets. No one is bothering to collect them anymore. I responded, but she never texted back. I'll update more as soon as I can. Anyone in Oro or Mammoth, please contact me. I haven't seen another human in over 2 days, and I feel like I'm the last person on Earth. Edit. It's almost 6 here, and a siren has been going off for about 10 minutes. I don't know if it's a tornado siren or an air raid siren, but it's loud and creepy as fuck. I noticed a small bruise on my right arm that, upon further fucking inspection, spreads all the way down one side of my back. I'm so fucking scared. I had a breakdown where I just screamed at the wall and cried, and there was blood in my tears, and that was like an hour ago. To the person calling businesses here, that is not us answering. Our downtown has been shut down all day. I called a couple of places where I know the business owners and employees, and the people who answered are not locals. I don't know what they told you, but they're not from here. I'm going to go over to the neighbors and I'm going to go over to the neighbors because I can't be alone anymore, and fuck it. It's not like I can get it because I've already got it. The sirens have made me terrified and the sun is almost down here. My name is Lindsay Allen. I'm 29 and I'm from Mammoth, Arizona. Oh, yeah. Well, That was the last story in the lineup of all that was sent to me. Yeah, it was either a zombie apocalypse or just like a total freaking plague. Like one of the two, or maybe a mix of both. Maybe some people, because like where'd the sister go, right? Like the sister just vanished or what? But it also said he was too scared to go check the room. So did the sister just not answer or what? I don't know. Well, yeah, it was unknown. It's good though. That was a good story. I like that one. Well, I guess it's about time to maybe call this, unless somebody got another story. Does anybody got another story for me to read? I'll read another one if somebody sends me one. Let me check Twitter. No, I don't have any more on Twitter here. Where does my chat feed go? I don't understand. It just vanishes on me. Like during the whole feed, I'll be trying to read something and all of a sudden, boom, it's gone. I don't get that. I don't know if that like always happens to everybody or what. And then it pops up for like 2 seconds and then it's gone again. What? I don't get it. You know what? I'm just gonna pop over here. Yeah, I agree. I agree with you, Jack. So, yep, I'm going to call it, guys. I hope you all have a great night. Thanks for joining me on Murder Mondays. If you haven't liked it, hit like. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. And yeah, I appreciate it. And y'all have a great one. Hey, no problem. This is fun. I love doing this. And thank you all for coming by and hanging out. I appreciate it. So, good night, everyone.